unidentified flying object.
Is Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, welcome back.
Thank you. Really great to be with you again.
It's always a pleasure. Now, let's go first to the November 21st event in Washington, D.C. And the reason why I like this so much is you don't have to necessarily even live in the area to attend the event because you offer your event through webinars. People can stream it from around the globe. I remember when we did this in Los Angeles at the Glendale College, everyone from literally around the world was watching this live while you were on stage. Now, what is the premise of this event? And let's talk a little bit about it.
Well, yes, it's going to be a live event in Washington, D.C. on November 21st. It's a 4-hour workshop, and it will also be webinared. So anyone who wants to come or see the webinar can register at SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS disclosure, all one word, .com, and all the information is there. And it's really about how the secret government works. And this really will be the most explosive expose that anyone will, I think, ever see on this subject, because what I'm going to do is tie together the 25 years of being with insiders who are inside these covert programs that manage the UFO and ET issue, and expose exactly which corporations, what DUMBs or underground bases are connected, which projects, code names of projects, people, corporate names, and corporate facilities that are located within the United States and other countries, and how they are all networked. And it's really, the reason I'm doing it is because in the legal world it's sui generis. It's sort of a one-of-a-kind body of information which I've never really put down in one place, where it can connect the dots for people to understand, first of all, how covert programs work. Secondly, what level of classification is involved, to the extent that members of the Congress and U.S. presidents haven't been privy to much of this, and how those are structured. Third, where the money is coming from. Fourth, what exactly are the facilities, who is involved, where are these bases today, and where have they been historically, and how has this evolved over the last 60 years since the 1940s, and how that's, evolved from what was originally a very classified project to projects that are now completely illegal and unacknowledged. So this is something that, everyone is always asking me, why is the government keeping this secret from me, or who is doing this? Well, this will be a 4-hour expose of all the details that I know, and there'll be a question and answer period probably for the last 45 minutes or so people can ask anything they want, and I'll try to answer to the full extent that I know.
One thing I've always been fearing, and I've been saying this on the show a lot lately, is that people or the government per se does not necessarily have to answer to the people ever since the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, which can allow anyone to send a request and get a document, mostly redacted. I really hate how you'll get a document from the CIA, will say Central Intelligence Agency, it'll give a date and a page number, and the rest will be blacked out. I mean, what's the point of even sending it? But
it's a charade, but I think it's more important to understand that I know FOIA officers, people who are in other words, people who are in charge of responding to those requests, but also the people who hold the security classifications. The things that we're talking about, ET reconnaissance, studying of extraterrestrial technology, anti-gravity propulsion systems, so-called free energy systems, all the things that we're referring to, these are part and parcel of projects that no one, and I say this with very good knowledge, no one who would even respond to the FOIA request would have access to those projects. In other words, if the person who is responsible for answering a FOIA request would have to deal with conventional top secret issues, even if you had the specific details of an unacknowledged special access project with its code numbers and code names, which I have, that person, if he inquired about it, they would be told no such project exists. Because I personally briefed a sitting CIA director who was told that. And this is the head of the CIA who is in power and approved by Congress and appointed by the president. So the public, see, we have to back this way up and get the public to understand how completely dysfunctional and screwed up this system has become over the last 60 years. I mean, it is really out of control. And I think that's why many times people will honestly be able to say there is no project by that name or code name. There is no facility there. There is no operation by this name. Because when they've made an inquiry, they have honestly gotten the information back. This doesn't exist. Because that is the nature of something I'm going to spend a lot of time explaining on November 21st. And that is how an unacknowledged special access project works. Now, this is something people need to memorize, this acronym, USAP, Unacknowledged Special Access Project. Now, a special access project is just something that's compartmentalized and secret. So, it's TSSCA, Top Secret Special Compartmentalized Intelligence. Those are a dime a dozen. There are thousands of them, probably 1 million of them. And there's almost 1 million people with the top secret clearance. What's important about a USAP, the unacknowledged special access projects, those aren't acknowledged to anyone outside the project. So let me explain how this works. Let's say that you're a general. I'm a colonel. Now, you outrank me, and we're both working, for example, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the head of whom I have personally briefed, General Patrick Hughes. Now, if I'm a colonel and I'm in one of these USAPs, I have been told that if I disclose to anyone not read into or briefed on the project and cleared to it, if I tell anyone about what we're doing, I will be terminated, killed. Now, that means that if my commanding general, who's not in that USAP compartment, makes an inquiry about it or gets some sort of hint that it exists, I am to turn to the general and say, sir, no such project exists, under penalty of death. Now, how do I know that? Because I personally have people on my team who have been in these USAPs. One of the military people who advised me for many years was in a $2 or $3 billion USAP. This was one unacknowledged project that, and when they formulated it, they put the people together, took them to one of these UGBs, underground bases, or DUMs, deep underground military bases. And everyone had their phones taken away, their watches, any electronics, everything. And they went down with a security officer, and the security officer was the only one with a weapon. And he pulled the weapon out and took a bullet out and said, and held it up to all the people in this USAP, this almost $3 billion unacknowledged special access project. And he said, if you speak to anyone, doesn't matter if it's the President of the United States, a general, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, anyone, if you speak to anyone who's not in this room about this operation, this bullet has your name on it, and it will find you. Now, that's what people have to understand. That is how these things really are done. And it's not out of a movie or a conspiracy theory. That's the real world of real secrecy. So that's the first thing people need to understand is the extraordinary level of secrecy that goes on and how utterly unconstitutional and illegal it is. Because, I'll give you an example. I'm briefing a man who was the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, Dr. J, look, this is literally J2, the guy who would be putting the intelligence briefings together for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Pentagon. And I personally briefed this man at his office, and I actually brought astronaut Edgar Mitchell with me. He'll verify this happened. And what happened prior to me going to the meeting is that I gave this admiral and sent by courier a top-secret document that was from Nellis Air Force Base, so-called Area 51, that had the project code names and code numbers on it, dealing with the ET issue. He, as the admiral who was in charge of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, made an inquiry to that compartmentalized, code-named entity, and of one of them. There were a whole bunch listed. And he got hold of someone. It was a contractor, corporate. And the big action, by the way, is corporate. And this person said, yeah, and he said, look, I'm Admiral Tom Wilson. I want to be read into, which is military speak for briefed, on this project. And the person at the other end of the phone said, sir, we cannot discuss this project with you. And he said, why not? He says, you don't have a need to know. He said, God damn it, I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. How can I not have a need to know? And they said, sir, we cannot and will not discuss this with you. And they hung up on him, and then they would never return his call again. So by the time I got to the briefing at the Pentagon with my team of Disclosure Project witnesses and astronaut Edgar Mitchell, this admiral was furious and scared, because here's a man of that level of responsibility in the world's largest military who he himself could not penetrate this USAP and was completely brushed off. Now, that is the truth. And and you know, if anyone says, is that really true, let's take it to court. The subpoenas would fly, and people would either have to perjure themselves or the truth would come out. Every word I'm telling you right now is the truth, the God's truth. So that is what people have to understand. So what good is a FOIA? I mean, you get some, it's some bureaucrat's going to answer a question, and you might get some old dusty things from 30 years ago. But current operations, I mean, those things are so tied up in these unbelievably illegal, unacknowledged special access projects. And the reason I say they're illegal is that if you're defying the chain of command, not only to the top people in Congress and the President of the United States, but also to your top military generals and admirals. And this happens, by the way. I have personally seen it happen. And the same thing happened to General, a 3-star general, Patrick Hughes. Go Google his name. You'll see pictures of him with Clinton and Madeleine Albright when she was Secretary of State. I personally briefed this man, and he was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Well, the Defense Intelligence Agency is almost as big as the CIA, but it's the intelligence shop for the Pentagon. And this was the director of it. And so I'm doing a briefing in his office in the E-ring of the Pentagon. And there are a couple other people there on my team and also his staff. And he acknowledged to me that he had made inquiries into the subject, but he had been told that basically nothing existed on the issue and no current operations were ongoing. And, in fact, he went over to his bookcase, get this, and as a gag gift, someone had given him a little E.T. doll, like a little 3-inch, toy, and to make fun of him. And he says, I know stuff is going. I said, sir, there are people on your staff who are in these unacknowledged special access projects, but they're not allowed to tell you. And there was a colonel at the table who visibly stiffened when I said that. And my military advisor and I concluded that that colonel was actually in those projects, but was lying to the general. So this is the real world, my friend. This is how messed up it is. And when you talk about illegal when I use the word illegal, unconstitutional operations, I know what I'm talking about. But this is not a conspiracy theory where, I pick something up off the internet. These are meetings that I have been at. I've been involved with at this level since I started meeting with the head of Army Intelligence in 1992 and briefing a sitting CIA director in 1993. So what I'm going to do on November 21st, for all of you who really want to learn about this and really have the veil pulled back, I'm going to deconstruct the whole thing about the secrecy, how it's been put together, who's doing it, where it's happening, and more importantly, what is the agenda? What the hell are they doing, and why is it so secret? Because that's a multi-layered story also. It's not just one reason, it's a whole constellations of reasons behind the secrecy, which really the public doesn't understand properly. And I think this is the reason I'm wanting to do this is that I think that, I mean, it's not like I think I'm going to drop dead tomorrow, but I just turned 60, and I've been doing this since I was 35. And, no one lives forever, and I think, you know what? These experiences, I can tell you there's no one in the UFO field who's had these experiences that we've had, my team has had, at this level.
And not to mention the cancer. You had teams, members of your team, all that had explicitly...
they're going to learn 25 years of research in these 4 hours of really how it's put together. Now, when I started on this, I'm an emergency doctor. I didn't know anything. I can't tell you, I didn't know anything about this system. And luckily, there were very good people who, over the last quarter of a century, have taken me under their wings, who are straight shooters, very, very stand-up people who have walked me through the system and then helped set up these kinds of meetings. So this is what's really important. I was in a meeting 2 years ago with 120 world leaders, and the Minister of Defense of Australia was there. And you have Pine Gap there near Alice Springs operating, a huge underground facility, which I have a picture of sitting here right at my desk, by the way, here in Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I can tell you that this Minister of Defense for Australia had really no knowledge of any consequence about things going on in his country that was a joint operation mainly dominated by U.S. Military and contractors, but is right there in the center of Australia, in the very center of the outback of Australia.
That is extremely sad that in their own country they're denied knowledge. And right here in the United States, like you mentioned that example where, for instance, a colonel is in a USAP and the general may not be, and the general inquires and the colonel has to say, sorry, it doesn't exist. And all these top people you have briefed, that is a broken system. And that's why you are such a valuable asset, because you have been able to brief them.
Well, I've been able to penetrate it, too. You have to understand, we have over 100 Disclosure Project witnesses. Remember, I'm sort of the father of the global disclosure movement. But there's over 500 more of them that aren't on videotape because they're scared, but who have given me information. So what I'm going to try to do on November 21st for people at the webinar and in person, if you can get to D.C., there's still room at this facility, is to put together all this mosaic, if you will, and get the picture, the biggest possible, but detailed big picture of what's really going on, not just in the United States, and this is why I call it the transnational deep security state. It isn't an international. International would imply that there is overt government-to-government knowledge and cooperation. This transcends the normal lines of geopolitics. So much so, you mentioned earlier the old Soviet Union and now Russia. There are USAPs within Russia and the U.S. that are hand in glove, and China working together.
That's right.
But the leaders of the countries don't even have access to those operations. This is the sub rosa. The deep story behind this and how it is structured is not what people think. And, people make these grand and sweeping conspiracy theories because they don't know. And what I want to do is provide the information that I have that is dispositive and that is clear from first-hand knowledge. I don't deal with second-hand stuff. So, or third-hand or rumors or what have you. I'm going to deal with information that I've gathered from people who with direct inside knowledge, or that where I have been, because I have been to some underground facilities and I've been in meetings with people. So where it's quite clear to me the level of information on this is something that needs to be known by the public, and I think the follow-on to all this is that we've really got to encourage. You mentioned this family member. We have got to encourage people who are involved in these operations not to do so anonymously anymore, but to come forward. We need a second massive wave of defectors who are patriots, who will defect from this illegal, corrupt, fascist system and do it because it's the right thing to do and it's legal for them to do it. And you're an attorney. We can talk about what the legalities are, how, for example, Edward Snowden made every mistake you can make, and how those mistakes can be avoided, and how we can take the lid off this secrecy and do it legally. And that's what we need to do. We need another whole wave of whistleblowers, but who know what they're who are advised on how to do it properly.
I'm so glad you brought up Snowden and defectors. I always say disclosure is in your hands when I'm speaking to the people, because really it can't just be researchers, specialists, authors, producers, hosts, journalists, like radio hosts such as me. We can't do all the work. We can only provide the information for the people. Everybody out there needs to step up and make acknowledgement happen. I don't want to say disclosure. I want to say acknowledgement, because it's already happened in 2001 with your disclosure project. A lot of people, anybody born, after 22 years ago, has been born after exoplanets have been found. I mean, it's just, you ask any high school or college student right now if life exists on other planets, no doubt in their mind whatsoever. You ask if we've been visited, a high majority actually say the same thing. And the thing is,
you're right.
And then that's why we have to get them out. And I'm really glad you said the defectors. We need those in high positions, such as Snowden. And there are ways you can.
Jefferson's house, which is right down the road from my place, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, We the People. And, I think about the Founding Fathers, but not only that, but the people who, like my father, who fought in World War II and risked his life and had terrible PTSD over it. And the people who tried to keep the country a relatively free and democratic place, the extent to which that's been plowed under in since World War II is really appalling to anyone. And I think that this is where I say to people who are in the military, in these corporate positions, it is a patriotic duty to expose this level of corruption and criminality that is not only illegal, but it's also keeping information secret from the public that is resulting in us living in a world that is not benefiting from the trillions of dollars that have been spent on studying these technologies, studying interstellar propulsion systems, studying systems that pull energy from the so-called zero-point field or quantum vacuum. All of this is information that belongs to the people and has been paid for by the people.
That's right.
And yet, here we are just completely being ripped off by what Eisenhower said, beware the military-industrial complex. And, here's a five-star general who is saying that. And so he was the ultimate patriot, and he was a conservative Republican. But he and you know what? You know who else said this to me? I was sitting in his living room.
Oh.
A guy named Senator Barry Goldwater.
Yes.
Who I know younger people have no idea who he is, but he ran for president in 1964 and lost. He was the senator from Arizona, the senior senator, and John McCain took his seat. John McCain's the guy who ran for president against Obama in 2008, for those who don't know. And I'm sitting there at Senator Barry Goldwater's house, and he had left the Senate, and he looks me squarely in the eye, and he says, Dr. Greer, it was a goddamn mistake then, and it's a goddamn mistake now that any of this was ever kept secret. And he proceeded to tell me about what good friends he was with General Curtis LeMay, who was a Air Force guy. I think at one point became Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and Senator Goldwater was a general in the Air Force Reserves. And so Senator Goldwater at some point turns to General Curtis LeMay and says, look, I want to be brought into the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where the ET materials are being kept. That's what it was called, the Blue Room. And General LeMay turned to Senator Goldwater and said, God damn it, Barry, I can't even get into those areas anymore. And if you ever ask me about this again, I will personally see that you are court-martialed out of the Air Force Reserves. And this is from Barry Goldwater's lips to my ears. And I'm sitting just nonplussed. I'm sitting in his living room, and his wife is sitting there with me and one of my assistants. And I'm going, oh, my God, this is unbelievable that a senior senator who's been on every committee, armed services, intelligence, ran for the Republican nominee at president, arch conservative, would be told that by a friend of his who's a general who himself, Colonel LeMay, was being blocked from those unacknowledged special access projects by then, and who threatened Senator Goldwater with an in-camera, a secret court-martial if he ever asked him about it again. And I asked Senator Goldwater, I said, was General Curtis LeMay serious? And Senator Goldwater said he was serious as a heart attack, and I never brought it up again.
Speaking of USAPs, unacknowledged special activities,
unacknowledged special access projects. Write it down.
Yeah, access projects. There's obviously a lot of funding by us, and then funding that we give without them knowing. One example that I could tell you is I spoke to a very credible person who was a Navy SEAL in Vietnam, 66 to 69, and he said every mission was given to him by a CA officer. When he left the military, he became a mercenary. One of his final missions, by the way, was to bomb a Colombian drug lord for not cooperating with us. Well, when he became a mercenary, he did two missions, 70 and 71. Both missions were to guard giant cargo ships full of cocaine to bring to the United States so we could use that money to fund things.
Yep, that is not a conspiracy theory. Let me tell you something that this will knock your socks off. So the day after our congressional briefings in 1997 in Washington, D.C., now, a lot of people don't know this. They know about the 2001 National Press Club event. They know about a lot of things that have happened in the last, 5 or 10 years. This is 18 years ago this fall. And we did a gathering of a couple dozen military top secret folks in a closed meeting in Washington for members of the Congress. And there were chairmen of committees there. There were people from the vice president's office. There were people from the president's office. There were all kinds of people there. And I was approached as I was setting this up by a former member of Congress who was sort of the consigliere for Papa Bush back in the day.
H.W.
Bush Sr.
Yeah.
Not yet, George H.W. Bush, who, of course, had been head of the CIA and also became president after Ronald Reagan and then was defeated by Clinton. And he says, I've got to meet with you because there's some information that I'm not sure you're aware of that you simply must know. And I said, all right. So he had a condo in Crystal City there near the National Airport. And I go to the meeting, and he had at the meeting a man who had been a senior executive with Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, La Jolla, California, headquarters at the time. And I said to him, well, what is it that you would wish to share? He said, first of all, he said, we love what you're doing. You have no idea how many people, even though, you would not expect it, very conservative people, patriotic, love what you're doing with disclosure because we all know that this is horrible what's happened to our country. I said, well, thank you. I'm trying to do the best I can. You know, I'm working full-time as an emergency doctor and raising 4 little children. So he said, well, look, he says, I'm not sure you understand how dangerous this group is. I said, oh, I understand. And he says, no, but let me share something with you. He said, and then the man who was with SAIC and he both started talking, and they shared that they were aware of, and the man at SAIC had been involved with a paramilitary operation that involved 8,000 men and soldiers. 8,000.
That's a lot. Yes.
That did nothing but move drugs around the world and take that cash because it's untraceable.
That's right.
And fund covert programs related to the UFO and ET issue. And he told me, and this was chilling, the executive with SAIC, I have all their names in my vault, and I have multiple vaults. I've said, I'm not going to disclose until folks are dead. But he said, look, I'm now living in at the south of France, virtually in exile, having left SAIC, this executive. He said, I left when I realized how absolutely without morals and ethics this operation was. He says, we ended up killing 2,000 of those men and women out of the 8,000 because of the most minor security infractions. He says, we literally killed 25% of them to maintain rigid secrecy over these drug operations connected to this secret government program. And these were people of the highest level of credibility. And I'm sitting there going, well, I had heard some of this before, and I went, oh, my God, this really is a disaster. Which, by the way, the reason drugs are illegal is that, now, I'm a doctor, and I can tell you right now, the worst drug is tobacco. 500,000 people a year are killed. Second worst is alcohol. Marijuana, this other stuff, it's a rounding error. It's not that I'm not in favor of drug use, don't get me wrong, but the illegality of it, instead of legalizing it and doing education and treatment, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on this phony drug war and on imprisoning millions of people. But the reason for it has nothing to do with public health. It has to do with, if you keep it illegal, it allows for this black budget funding operation to continue that's enmeshed with these drug cartels and gangs. And that is not a conspiracy theory. This was a senior member of Congress who had retired, who was an insider in the Bush Klan, and a senior executive with SAIC, one of the biggest government contractors out there. Now, that is the truth. So what that Navy SEAL told you, he was telling you God's truth.
And let's not forget, first of all, that Halliburton, a government contractor, is involved in the military and in prisons, everything from toothpaste to shoelaces to building actual prisons. Same thing with the arms in the military. They're the ones to gain. And like you said, another story, I got this from a DIA operative, a different person than the Navy SEAL, told me of another DIA operative he was working with who had come across some information that was scary, to say the least. The superiors involved in that UFO department, whatever you want to call it, found out that he knew some information. So he was scared, and he told his wife, he was walking around with a bulletproof vest. He was found in the desert with a gunshot wound to the head. Now, they ruled it as a suicide. Who in the hell would commit suicide wearing a bulletproof vest? I mean, does that make any sense?
Right, no. And of course, they're always written off as suicides.
Yes.
Or an accident or what have you. But this is how criminal this operation is. And I think this is why people have to understand, when you're dealing with a sort of, and I mean no offense to you, but some light-in-the-loafers politician lawyer that's running for office from wherever and then happens to become the president of the United States, you think they're going to take on these people?
No, never.
I mean, come on. This is why I keep saying to people, and there are other kind of knockoffs of the disclosure effort, which I'm not going to name, but who say, oh, well, we need to get these people. I said, look, I plowed that field in the 90s. The reason we did the 2001 National Press Club event is that we had concluded that no member of Congress and no president was going to touch this because they didn't want to be taken out.
That's right.
And in fact, after I briefed the CIA director for Bill Clinton, one of Bill Clinton's very close friends and sort of fundraisers came to my home and sat at my dining room table with my 4 children and wife and said, look, the president and his folks are very supportive of what you've recommended in the white paper. I did a brief on the recommendations for what the president should do. He said, look, they're concerned that if the president does this, he'll end up like Jack Kennedy.
Dead.
Shot. And I start laughing.
Yeah.
I literally start laughing because I think this is a kind of a big, fat, jolly guy. He was always a big jokester. And I thought he was making sort of like, if I tell you I have to kill you kind of joke. He stopped me when I started laughing. He said, no, I'm serious. I said, well, don't talk about this in front of the children. So we took him to the library later and we had a talk. He said, no. He says, they're terrified of taking this on. I said, well, what do you want me to do? I'm a country doctor here running an emergency department, taking care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and stuff. And he says, well, we think you ought to do it. I started laughing. I said, you out of your mind? And literally later after this, a senior CIA guy who is in this MAGIC group, in the Majority Committee for Intelligence Committee, sent a guy down to where I was living and said, we really need someone to carry this forward because no one in the system will do it. That's literally how I ended up going from medicine to this craziness. But that's literally a true story. I mean, if you made this in the movie, I swear, if you're in LA, if there's any producer who knows how to make a movie, this is a true story. You make a movie out of this, it's going to be bigger than Avatar. But the fact of the matter is, these folks don't want to do it. And this is why I say we the people have to do it, and we have to find people who've been in these unacknowledged special access projects, who have actionable intelligence, documents, material, anything, and they need to start coming forward, name, rank, and serial number. Anonymous don't work. It ain't going to work to do it anonymously. They need to come out, be named, and they need to do it with the goods, with as much goods as they've got. And it isn't illegal for them to do it. They're not breaking any laws to do it because the projects they're in, whether they know it or not, this is why I'm doing the webinar. Whether they know it or not, the projects they are in are illegal. And if they are illegal operations, the rule of law, including their security oaths, are vitiated. They're nullified. And this is the foundation of the Disclosure Project, which if you want to get into the details of that and what we did to legally cover our asses when we started bringing all this stuff out, and the reason no one's been prosecuted on my team is because we were very much able to prove that these projects are criminal enterprises, and as such, the rule of law, including the National Security Act, doesn't apply to them. So the truth is, you can't have it both ways. You can't break the law, lie to members of the generals and admirals and the Congress and what have you, and embezzle money and murder people, and then prance around saying, oh, well, no one can talk about what we're doing because of the National Security Act. You cannot have it both ways, Dr. J. You've got to have it one way or another. So since they've decided to run these operations illegally, they're naked. They have no cover of law. And therefore, anyone listening, if you've got a family member, have them contact me through Sirius Disclosure, SIRIUS, like the star system, SiriusDisclosure.com. And and I don't want secondhand, but if firsthand folks get hold of me, we'll put you together. And if you have documents, get them to me. I don't care how top secret they are. If you've got material from a body, material from a craft, material, whatever it is, get it to us. And I'll carry it out. That's what I do. I'll bring it out. So, but it helps if people are willing to be identified because there's very little credibility with an anonymous kind of source. So they either need to come and give us documents and proof, or they need to be identified with their credentials showing they did work at a facility or they were in the military during those years, etc., and preferably with other corroborating people. And there's protection in numbers and there's strength in numbers. That's why when we did this, a lot of people weren't around in how we put this together, but between the late 90s and 2001 when we did it, we put together dozens of these folks who were all revealed all at once. Because there was strength in numbers, credibility in numbers, but also safety in numbers. That we need to do another phase of that.
I'm so glad you actually brought that up for him to contact you. Now, we do have one small listener question. I was hoping we'd get it before break, because when we come back from break, I want to talk more about, of course, the event. Then I want to talk about CE5 and then anything else about these people that are lying their brains off to hide this technology for us. The question.